The phone call came on a Tuesday, the sky outside the kitchen window a flat, unfeeling gray. Arthur stood with one hand braced against the counter, the receiver pressed to his ear, the lawyer's calm, professional voice detailing a fortune that felt like a physical weight. $33 million. The number echoed in the silent house, a stark contrast to the quiet grief that had been his constant companion for months. It was all Elena's. Her foresight, her separate investments made long before they'd met. Nurtured with a quiet intelligence she'd never felt the need to flaunt. The money had been her secret garden, a place of independence and security she had tended to alone. The revelation was not a shared joy, but a solitary burden, a final, overwhelming secret passed from her hands to his. A sharp, familiar pang of loss hit him, so visceral he had to close his eyes. He could almost smell her perfume, the faint scent of jasmine and vanilla that always lingered on her scarf. The memory was a knife twist in the numbness that had protected him. This money was her last act, her final provision, and the responsibility of it settled on his shoulders, heavy and cold. His first instinctive thought was of Lily, his daughter, so young, so in love, her wedding mere days away. The image of her radiant, hopeful face clashed violently with the cold mechanics of vast wealth. He could already see the hungry glint in certain eyes, the subtle shift in dynamics, the way something pure could be corrupted by the sheer gravitational pull of that much money. The Thorntons, Mark's family with their polished condescension, would swarm it like wasps to ripe fruit. No, this day, Elena's last wish for their daughter would be about love. Only love. The money would remain his secret, a silent vow made to the empty kitchen, to her memory. He would let the world see only a grieving, modest father. He would let the Thorntons reveal their true measure. And he would protect Elena's legacy, this final, colossal expression of her love, from anyone who might see it as anything but sacred. He hung up the phone, the silence of the house now filled with the echo of his promise. The morning light was soft, filtering through the gauzy curtains of the bedroom he had once shared with Elena. Arthur stood before the old oak dresser, his hands resting on its scarred surface. Today was Lily's day. The thought should have brought joy, but it was wrapped in a familiar, heavy cloak of absence. He opened the top drawer, the scent of dried lavender and cedar meeting him, a fragrance Elena had always tucked among her things. His fingers brushed against a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver locket, its surface worn smooth from years of wear. He clicked it open. There she was, Elena, young and laughing, her dark hair swept back, her eyes crinkled with a joy so vivid it felt like a physical blow. Next to her, a tiny photo of Lily as a baby, chubby-cheeked and serene. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Elena humming in this very room. A simple, tuneless melody she'd always default to when content. She'd been folding laundry, sunlight catching the dust motes dancing around her. "All I want for her is to be happy, Arthur," she had said, not looking up from a tiny sock. "Not rich, not impressive, just truly, simply happy. That's the only inheritance that matters." He could almost feel the ghost of her hand on his shoulder. The vow he had made after the lawyer's call solidified, moving from a decision in his mind to a ritual in his heart. He lifted the locket, pressing the cool metal to his lips, closing his eyes. He repeated her words in a whisper, a quiet incantation against the opulence and judgment he knew the day would bring. "This day is for love," he murmured to her memory, to the empty room. "Only love. I promise you." He placed the locket carefully around his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt where it rested against his skin, a secret weight, a tangible piece of her wisdom he would carry into the battle of the day. It was not about the money hidden away, the staggering number in a bank vault. It was about this, her wish, her memory. He would ensure nothing and no one would overshadow that. The air in the church hall hummed with last-minute urgency, a stark contrast to the quiet of Arthur's morning ritual. He moved with a practiced efficiency, straightening chair rows and adjusting floral arrangements that had shifted in transit. His hands, though aged, were capable. A lifetime of fixing things, of making do, had left them steady and sure. Lily appeared, a vision in her simple robe, her pre-wedding jitters evident in the way she twisted her hands. "Dad, the guest book pen is missing, and the programs are out of order near the entrance." "I'll see to it," Arthur said, his voice a calm anchor. He found a spare pen in his jacket pocket, the same one he'd used for years, and quickly reorganized the scattered programs into a neat stack. As he worked, he felt a presence behind him. Arthur, already putting you to work, are they?" Richard Thornton's voice was a jovial boom that didn't quite reach his eyes. He stood with his wife, Cynthia, both impeccably dressed in clothes that cost more than Arthur's car. Richard clapped a heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder, a gesture meant to be friendly, but that felt more like a claim of territory. "Don't worry, son. We've hired plenty of staff to handle the grunt work. You should be enjoying the day." Cynthia's smile was a thin, polished curve. "Yes, Arthur, you really mustn't trouble yourself. Though it's commendable how hands-on you are." Her gaze swept over his simple suit, the faint shine on the elbows, and her eyes held a glint of pity she made no effort to conceal. "We do appreciate you pitching in, given the circumstances." Mark stood slightly behind his parents, offering Arthur an apologetic half-smile before looking away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to interject. Arthur simply nodded, handing the neatly stacked programs to a passing usher. "All set," he said mildly. "It's no trouble." He watched as Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of irritation that Arthur's competence had subtly undermined their narrative of his helplessness. Cynthia's gaze lingered a moment too long, her compliment a carefully wrapped insult. They expected gratitude for their condescension, but Arthur only felt the cool weight of the locket against his chest, a silent reminder of the promise he had made, and the true value they would never understand. The church was a cavern of hushed reverence and polished wood, smelling faintly of old hymnals and floral arrangements. Arthur chose a pew near the back, the space around him remaining conspicuously empty as other guests filtered in. They clustered in groups, their expensive perfumes and tailored suits marking them as Thornton friends, their low murmurs creating a soft, exclusive hum. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, a silent observer in his own daughter's wedding. Snippets of conversation drifted toward him, carried on the still, sanctified air. Such a beautiful venue. Richard and Cynthia really outdid themselves. Of course, one does wonder what the father of the bride contributed. A case of wine, perhaps. A light, tinkling laugh. "Be kind. I heard he's a retired mechanic. This must all be a bit overwhelming for him. It's rather noble of the Thorntons, taking them both on. Lily seems a sweet girl, despite her simple background. Quite. One hopes she adapts. It would be a shame if she didn't appreciate the lifestyle Mark can provide." The words were not meant for his ears, which made them all the more damning. They painted him as a charity case, a man of no consequence, his love and presence a negligible factor in the grand Thornton production. He felt the assumptions like a physical pressure, a condescension so ingrained it was simply the air they breathed. Their world was one where value was declared by a label, worth measured by a bank statement. He did not shift in his seat. He did not turn to look. His isolation was a palpable thing, the empty space on the polished bench beside him a clear boundary. He was the quiet man in the slightly worn suit, easily overlooked, already categorized and dismissed. And with each whispered assumption, each casual dismissal of his life's work and his daughter's worth, his resolve hardened into something cold and unbreakable. He would give them the silent, unassuming man they expected. He would let them hang themselves with the rope of their own prejudice. The weight of Elena's secret, the locket cool against his skin, was no longer a burden but a shield. He settled deeper into the pew, a patient king in a court of fools, waiting for the curtain to rise. The organ swelled, a wave of sound that washed over the congregation and pulled Arthur to his feet. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat out of sync with the stately processional. Then he saw her. Lily stood at the end of the aisle, a vision of trembling hope in her mother's modified gown. Her eyes found his wide with love and nerves, and in that instant, the church, the guests, the Thorntons, all of it fell away. He offered his arm, and she took it, her grip tight. As they began the slow walk, each step was a lifetime. The scent of lilies was overpowering, but beneath it, he caught the faintest ghost of jasmine and vanilla. Elena's perfume, the memory, was so vivid it stole his breath. She should be here, on his other arm, her proud tears mingling with his. The ache of her absence was a physical wound, a hollowed-out space in a world that nothing could ever fill. He focused on the solid warmth of Lily's hand on his arm, the weight of her trust. He guided her forward, his steps steady though his vision blurred. These were not tears of weakness, but of a love so vast it had to overflow, a depth of feeling the Thorntons with their calculated generosity could never fathom. He was giving away their daughter, fulfilling a promise made in a sunlit bedroom a lifetime ago. At the altar, he placed Lily's hand in Mark's, his own lingering for a moment, a final, silent transfer of care. Then he turned to face the assembled guests. The microphone felt cool and alien in his hand. His voice, when it came, was rough with emotion but clear. "Elena," he began, and the name hung in the air, a sacred invocation. Lily's mother believed that the strongest foundations weren't made of stone or money, but of loyalty, of showing up day after day, of choosing each other, even when it's hard. He looked at Lily and Mark, his gaze fierce with love. That's the commitment she valued above all else. It's the only legacy that truly lasts. Be loyal to each other. Choose each other. Everything else is just noise. He stepped back, his brief speech echoing Elena's simple, profound wisdom. There was no mention of cost, of contribution, of futures bought and sold. Only the raw, unvarnished truth of love. As he took his seat, the emptiness beside him felt less like a void and more like a presence. He had walked their daughter down the aisle. He had spoken her mother's truth. The pride that surged through him then was tempered with sorrow, a perfect, painful balance that was the entirety of his love for them both. The reception hall was a spectacle of calculated opulence, a monument to Thornton wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, each prism catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 dizzying shards. Tables groaned under the weight of elaborate centerpieces, towering arrangements of orchids and roses that seemed more like architecture than flowers. A string quartet played something tastefully classical in one corner, the notes barely audible over the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of self-congratulation. Arthur entered with the tail end of the wedding party, a quiet figure in the wake of the Thorntons' grand procession. Richard and Cynthia led the way, arms linked, their smiles broad and proprietary, accepting compliments on the splendor they had commissioned. Arthur's eyes did not widen in wonder. They narrowed slightly, assessing. He saw not beauty, but excess. The price of a single centerpiece could have fed a family for a month. The ice sculpture, slowly melting into a meaningless shape, was pure vanity. It was all so much noise, so much wasted effort, a performance designed to showcase power, not to celebrate love. A discreet usher in a black waistcoat gestured him toward a table tucked near the swinging doors to the kitchen. It was far from the head table, positioned squarely in the path of serving staff and the distant hum of dishwashers. The other occupants were a distant cousin of Cynthia's and a business associate of Richard's, who clearly drew the short straw. The seating was no accident. It was a deliberate placement, a subtle but unmistakable power play. Here, at the margins, was where they believed he belonged. The humble father, the charity case, to be acknowledged from a distance, but kept away from the inner circle of importance. Arthur accepted the chair offered to him with a quiet nod. He smoothed his napkin onto his lap, his expression neutral, but inside, the observation was filed away, another piece of evidence in the case he was building against their character. The grandeur of the room only made their pettiness more glaring. Richard Thornton rose, champagne flute held aloft like a scepter. The gentle clinking of his fork against the crystal silenced the room. all eyes turning toward him with practiced expectation. He stood at the head table, a king before his court, his smile broad and self-assured. "Family, friends," he began, his voice a well-oiled instrument of performance. "What a joy it is to see you all here to celebrate my son, Mark, and his beautiful new bride, Lily." He paused, letting the applause ripple through the room before continuing. "Cynthia and I," he said, gesturing magnanimously toward his wife, who offered a regal nod, "are so proud of the life we've been able to build for our children. It's that life, that security, that we are so happy to share with Lily now." He launched into a detailed account of the Thornton contributions, the exclusive venue booking, the renowned caterer, the designer of the floral arrangements, each detail a brick in the monument of his own generosity. "We wanted nothing but the best for them," he declared, his chest swelling slightly. "We've always believed that setting the right tone, providing the proper foundation, is the greatest gift a parent can give." His eyes swept over the opulent room, inviting everyone to admire the foundation he had purchased. Then his gaze landed briefly on Arthur, a flicker of condescending warmth in his eyes. "And of course, we welcome Arthur into our family with open arms. It takes a village. As they say, the dismissal was elegant, absolute. Arthur was relegated to a supporting role in the Thornton narrative, a beneficiary of their magnanimity, his own role as father rendered incidental." Arthur did not stiffen. He did not frown. He simply watched, his champagne flute untouched on the table. His expression was one of cool, detached observation, as if studying a particularly interesting specimen. He noted the proud set of Richard's shoulders, the performative warmth in his tone, the way the toast was less a blessing for the couple and more a celebration of the Thornton family's prowess. There was no anger, only a deep, analytical calm. He was learning them, memorizing their tells, understanding the precise dimensions of their vanity. Each self-congratulatory word was another piece of the puzzle, confirming the silent vow he had made in a quiet kitchen days before. He raised his water glass in a minimal, silent countertoast, not to the Thorntons, but to the memory of a woman who would have found the entire display deeply vulgar. Arthur excused himself from the periphery table, moving with a quiet, unhurried grace through the glittering throng. He was a ghost at the feast, a silent witness drifting along the edges of conversations, a water glass in hand serving as his prop. He did not seek to engage. His purpose was to listen, to absorb the unvarnished truth of the room when its occupants believed themselves unobserved. He paused near a group of Richard's associates, their voices carrying the confident boom of men accustomed to being heard. "A brilliant match for Mark," one was saying, clapping Richard on the back. "The boy's set now. VP by 30, I'd wager." Richard beamed, accepting the praise as his due. "He's a Thornton. It's in the blood, and we'll make sure Lily rises to the occasion. A bit of polishing, of course. Her father's a good man, simple, but you can see the limitations in the upbringing. No connections, no legacy to speak of. But we're generous people. We'll provide what was lacking." A few feet away, Cynthia held court with a circle of women, her voice a softer, more insidious instrument. "She's such a sweet, genuine girl," she said, the words dripping with a pity that masqueraded as compassion. "One can't help but admire that rustic charm. It's rather refreshing in its way. Of course, we'll have to guide her taste. The wedding gifts she registered for were so quaint. But that's what family is for, to elevate." Arthur absorbed it all, the blunt entitlement of the father, the sweetly venomous condescension of the mother. Their worldview was laid bare. People were projects to be managed. Value was a transaction, and love was conditional upon one's ability to reflect well on the Thornton name. Their generosity was not a gift, but a tool of control, a means of establishing hierarchy. He took a slow sip of water, his expression neutral, his mind a steel trap. His silence was not passive, it was a strategic choice. He was gathering evidence, building a dossier on their character from their own careless words. Each boast, each backhanded compliment about Lily's simple roots was another data point, confirming the profound necessity of a secret. He moved on, a shadow among the bright, chattering lights, his mission clear and his resolve absolute. The string quartet shifted into a softer, more melodic piece, a waltz that seemed to quiet the room's glittering chatter. It was the signal for the father-daughter dance. Arthur saw Lily standing near the edge of the dance floor, looking small and suddenly uncertain amidst the Thornton splendor. Her eyes found his, seeking an anchor. He crossed the room and offered his hand, a simple, steady gesture. She took it, her fingers cold and trembling slightly. He led her onto the floor, his movements sure and gentle, one hand on her back, the other holding hers. They began to move a slow, turning island in a sea of watching eyes. For a moment, they danced in silence, the music weaving around them. Then Lily leaned closer, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "Dad," she breathed, the word laced with a fear he hadn't heard since she was a child. "What if I disappear?" He looked down at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "I'm not like them," she continued, her voice tight. "Their world is so loud. It's all about what you have, who you know. What if I get lost in it? What if I forget who I am? What if I become just Mark's wife, and they erase everything else? You, Mom, our home, the person I was before all this?" Her fear wasn't about fitting in. It was about annihilation, about her identity being swallowed whole by the Thornton narrative. Arthur held her a little tighter, his steps never faltering. He thought of the locket against his skin, of Elena's quiet wisdom, of the staggering secret he carried for this very reason. "Lily," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "Look at me." She did, her eyes glistening. "You're your mother's daughter. That is your core. That is your strength. Never forget that." He chose his next words with care, a subtle thread of foreshadowing woven into his reassurance. The loudest, shiniest things in a room are often the cheapest. The most valuable treasures are the ones you have to look for, the ones that don't need to announce themselves. Your worth isn't for them to decide. True worth is often hidden, protected until the right moment. You won't disappear. You'll remember who you are. I promise. He saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. She rested her head against his chest, and they finished the dance in a quiet understanding, a silent pact against the glittering, oblivious world around them. He had given her not just comfort, but a cryptic truth, a piece of the armor she would need, though she didn't yet know it. The final notes of the waltz faded, leaving a polite smattering of applause in their wake. Arthur guided Lily back toward the edge of the dance floor, where Mark waited with a dutiful smile. As Mark swept her into the next dance, Arthur melted back into the periphery, his role as comforting father complete for the moment. He moved toward the long, mahogany bar, not for a drink, but for the strategic cover it offered. The bartenders were busy, their backs turned as they mixed elaborate cocktails. Arthur positioned himself slightly behind a thick, decorative pillar draped with ivy, a natural blind spot that afforded him a clear view of a plush seating area where Richard and Cynthia Thornton had settled with fresh glasses of champagne. He stood perfectly still, a man simply pausing to catch his breath, his expression neutral. Their voices, lowered in confidential tones, carried easily across the short distance. "A relief that's over," Cynthia was saying, her voice a smooth, dismissive murmur. "She did well enough, I suppose. No one would guess she'd never waltzed before." Richard grunted, taking a sip of his drink. "She's adaptable. That's something. But we need to be realistic, CYN. There's nothing coming from the other side. No dowry, no inheritance. Arthur's a decent man, but let's be blunt. He's got nothing to offer but his blessing." Cynthia's sigh was one of weary practicality. "We'll have to manage her expectations then. Gently, of course. She can't possibly anticipate the same lifestyle for herself that Mark is accustomed to. Not without our guidance. We'll need to introduce her to our financial planner, set a very modest allowance. It's for her own good, really, to prevent any disappointment." "Exactly," Richard agreed, his tone implying this was simple, obvious logic. "We'll handle it. We'll provide the structure. It's our responsibility now. We're not just gaining a daughter-in-law. We're taking on a project. We'll manage her." The word manage hung in the air, cold and transactional. They spoke of his daughter not as a person entering their family, but as a problem to be solved, a variable in their financial equations that needed to be controlled. Arthur remained motionless behind the pillar, his breathing even. He didn't feel the hot flash of anger they might have expected. Instead, he felt a cold, clarifying certainty. This was the true currency of their world. Not love, not respect, but management. And he stored every word, another crucial piece of evidence in the quiet case he was building against them. The conversation at the plush seating area continued, the Thorntons' voices alow, conspiratorial hum against the reception's distant music. Arthur remained a statue behind the pillar, his presence entirely forgotten by them, his attention absolute. Mark's older brother, David, slouched into an empty armchair, swirling a glass of amber whiskey. He'd clearly been enjoying the open bar. He caught the tail end of his parents' discussion and let out a short, derisive laugh. A project, David repeated, shaking his head with a smirk. More like a permanent dependent. Let's be real. The only inheritance coming from that side of the family is a recipe for meatloaf and a lifetime supply of dad jokes. He took a sip, his eyes crinkling with cruel amusement. I guess Arthur's retirement plan is us now. Hope he likes canned soup and subsidized housing. We can set him up in one of the company's maintenance sheds. Keep him busy changing light bulbs for pocket change. Richard chuckled, a dry, approving sound. Cynthia offered a thin, tight smile, neither endorsing nor chastising the cruelty. It was simply accepted, the natural order of things. Arthur did not flinch. He did not feel the hot rush of insult. Instead, a profound, unnerving calm settled over him. His fingers, resting against the cool pillar, did not curl into fists. His breathing remained even and shallow. The joke, meant to diminish him, only served to illuminate them. He was a collector of truths now, and they were generously providing them. He stored the words, canned soup, subsidized housing, pocket change, not as wounds, but as exhibits. Each callous syllable was another brick in the wall of their own making, a wall he would one day calmly walk around to reveal the vast, untouched garden Elena had left behind. He was not seething, he was assembling, and the picture they were painting of themselves was damning. The multi-tiered wedding cake stood as a gleaming monument at the center of the reception, a confectionery feat of fondant and sugar flowers that seemed to defy gravity. It was a spectacle, a testament to excess that drew admiring murmurs from the guests. Arthur watched from a short distance as the photographer arranged Lily and Mark before it, their hands placed together on the oversized silver cake knife. Cynthia Thornton glided to the forefront, her smile as polished and perfect as the icing. She positioned herself just so, ensuring she was in every shot the architect of this particular piece of theater. As the camera flashes popped, she turned her head slightly toward Arthur, her voice a honeyed murmur meant to carry only to him. "Isn't it magnificent, Arthur?" she said, her eyes not on him but on the cake, as if admiring her own reflection. "We spared no expense, of course. The finest patisserie in the city. We knew you couldn't possibly manage something like this. So we simply had to." She finally let her gaze slide to him, sweetly venomous, the implied gratitude hanging in the air like a challenge. "I do hope you're enjoying it." The remark was designed to land as both a boast and a condescending pat on the head, a reminder of his place as the beneficiary of their magnanimity. Arthur met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's very elaborate," he said, his tone mild, devoid of either awe or resentment. "Thank you for seeing to it." His response, a simple acknowledgement that refused to genuflect, clearly did not satisfy her. Her smile tightened a fraction before she was forced to turn back to the camera. Her performative generosity met with a calm that refused to play its assigned part. Arthur watched the knife slide into the cake, his mind not on the cost of the sugar, but on the priceless, weightless secret he carried, a truth far sweeter than anything money could buy. The rich scent of coffee and perfume lingered near the edge of the dance floor, where Arthur had sought a moment of quiet respite. He watched the swirl of silk and laughter, a silent spectator to a celebration that felt increasingly like a performance. Then a gentle hand touched his elbow. He turned to find Mrs. Gable, Elena's old college roommate, her eyes warm and crinkled with a sympathy that felt genuine, not performative. She smelled faintly of gardenias, Elena's favorite flower, and the association was a sudden, sweet ache. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft. "It's a beautiful day. She would have loved it." He nodded, the gesture tight with emotion. She would have. Mrs. Gable studied his face, her perceptive gaze missing nothing. "And what about you, my dear?" she asked gently. "Now that the day is almost done, what will you do? It must feel so vast, the quiet after this. All that empty time." The question was not prying, but loving. It came from a place of true concern, an echo of Elena's own nurturing spirit. It was the first inquiry all day that felt solely about him, not his utility or his lack. Arthur looked past her to where Lily was laughing at something Mark said, the worry from their dance momentarily erased from her face. The urge to confide, to share the staggering weight of the secret with someone who had loved Elena too, was a powerful pull. But he thought of the Thorntons' calculating whispers, their jokes about canned soup, their plans to manage his daughter. The inheritance was not his to reveal. It was Elena's final, sacred trust, a weapon to be deployed only when the battle lines were fully drawn. He turned his gaze back to Mrs. Gable, his smile gentle but firm. "My plans are simple," he said, his voice low and steady. "I plan on watching my daughter be happy. That's the only thing that matters now. That's what she would have wanted me focused on." It was a deflection, but it was not a lie. It was a vow wrapped in a quiet truth, a protection of Elena's memory as much as her legacy. He saw the understanding in Mrs. Gable's eyes, a slight sadness, but also a deep respect. She patted his arm once more, a silent communication between people who had loved the same extraordinary woman, and then she melted back into the crowd, leaving him alone with his purpose, intact and unbreached. The gift table was a sprawling landscape of opulence, a glittering testament to Thornton wealth and influence. Silver-wrapped boxes tied with thick silk ribbons stood next to tastefully minimalist envelopes that undoubtedly contained checks with impressive numbers. A gleaming set of designer cookware, still in its glossy packaging, sat beside a crystal decanter set that probably cost more than Arthur's monthly pension. It was a display of transactional generosity, each gift a marker of status and obligation. Arthur approached this monument to excess with a quiet certainty. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he withdrew a single, simple envelope. It was not thick. It contained no check, no deed, no key to a luxury car. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper upon which he had written, in his careful, steady hand, a blessing for their marriage. It spoke of patience, of kindness, of choosing each other every day. Tucked behind it was a small, faded photograph of Elena, young and radiant, holding a toddler Lily on her hip, both of them laughing into the sun. It was not a gift of monetary value. It was a piece of his heart, a fragment of their history, the only inheritance he believed truly mattered. He placed the humble envelope at the edge of the table, where it looked small and almost forlorn next to the towering presence. As he turned away, he caught Cynthia Thornton's eye. She had been watching, her gaze sharp and assessing. She glided over, her smile a masterpiece of condescending pity perfected for an audience of nearby guests. She picked up his envelope, her manicured fingers making it seem even more insignificant. "Oh, Arthur," she said, her voice pitched to carry just enough. "How thoughtful." A card. She held it as if it were a slightly soiled napkin, her smile never reaching her eyes. It was a performance of magnanimity, a display of her ability to find value in even the most pathetic of offerings. Her pity was not for him. It was for the spectators, a demonstration of her own superior grace. She placed it back on the table, precisely where it had been, a dismissed trifle. Arthur met her gaze for a brief moment, his own expression unreadable, before turning to melt back into the crowd, leaving his true, priceless gift amongst their worthless treasures. The reception's energy had begun to ebb, leaving pockets of quiet conversation in its wake. Arthur saw Mark standing alone near a potted fern, looking less like a groom and more like a man awaiting instructions. His gaze was fixed across the room, where his parents held court, their body language telegraphing expectation even from a distance. Arthur moved to his side, his approach quiet and unhurried. "Mark," he said, his voice low. "A word." Mark turned, a polite, slightly distracted smile automatically gracing his features. "Of course, Arthur. Everything all right?" They stepped into the relative seclusion of a curtained alcove, the noise of the party softening to a murmur. Arthur looked at the young man his daughter had chosen, seeing not the Thornton heir, but the partner for his child. He thought of Elena, of the equal footing their marriage had always stood upon, a partnership built on mutual respect, not hierarchy. "I just wanted to say," Arthur began, choosing his words with care, "that a strong marriage isn't about one person leading and the other following. It's not a transaction. It's a partnership. Two people standing side by side, looking in the same direction. Humility, the ability to truly listen, to value the other's perspective as your own. That's the bedrock. Not money, not status. Just two people choosing each other every day." He spoke from a deep well of experience, his advice rooted in a love that had been his greatest wealth. But as he spoke, he watched Mark's eyes flicker away, back toward the distant figures of his parents. Mark nodded politely, a rehearsed gesture. "That's very wise, Arthur. Thank you," he said, his tone earnest, but his attention clearly divided. He was listening to the ghost of another conversation, one about dynasties and legacies and proper roles. The conflict was plain on his face. He loved Lily. Arthur could see that, but he was enmeshed in a family where love was often conditional upon obedience to a predetermined script. "Of course," Arthur said softly, not pressing further. He had planted the seed of a different kind of partnership, one of equality, not submission. Whether it would take root in soil already thick with Thornton expectations remained to be seen. He gave Mark's shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze before turning away, leaving the young groom to his silent tug-of-war. The reception was winding down, the glittering facade beginning to show its seams. The string quartet had packed away their instruments, replaced by the low thrum of hired staff clearing glasses. Arthur was near the now empty gift table, straightening a fallen place card, when Richard Thornton's presence materialized beside him, a wave of expensive cologne and unearned familiarity. Richard clapped a heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder, the gesture more a claim of ownership than a sign of affection. He leaned in, his voice a jovial boom meant to be overheard by the straggling guests. "Well, Arthur," he said, his smile a tight, gleaming thing. "We made it through. Quite the day." He paused, his eyes scanning Arthur's simple suit with a practiced, dismissive sweep. "I have to say, it's a relief. Finally getting a son-in-law who won't be a drain on the family resources. Don't worry," he added, the joke landing with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "We'll keep you off the streets. Can't have the father of the bride panhandling outside the country club, can we?" The threat was veiled in laughter, but it was there, a promise of controlled, condescending charity, a lifetime of reminded obligations. Arthur didn't stiffen. He didn't offer the flinch or the forced, grateful smile Richard clearly expected. Instead, he turned fully to face his new father-in-law, his expression one of serene observation. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "True wealth," Arthur said, his voice calm and measured, carrying a depth that silenced Richard's performative mirth, "isn't measured in banks, Richard. Some treasures aren't for display. They're simply held." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet utterly incomprehensible to a man like Richard. They spoke of a value system he could not quantify and therefore could not respect. Arthur's gaze was steady, not challenging, but knowing. He had just drawn a line in an invisible sand, asserting a sovereignty Richard didn't know existed. Then, with a slight nod, Arthur turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing slightly bewildered by a rebuke so gentle it felt like a victory, yet so pointed it felt like a threat. The music had faded to a memory, the last of the guests drifting away like leaves on a pond, leaving behind the hollowed-out grandeur of the reception hall. Arthur was gathering discarded napkins from a table when he felt a presence at his elbow. He turned to find Lily, still in her wedding gown, the brilliant white seeming to swallow her in the dimming light. The carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the raw anxiety in her eyes. "Dad!" Her voice was small, a thread of sound in the vast, emptying room. He abandoned the napkins, his full attention on her. "What is it, sweetheart?" She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture he hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I was talking to Cynthia about the honeymoon itinerary. She was going over the private tours, the dinners at places I can't even pronounce. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not about the money. It's not even about the things." She looked up, her eyes pleading for him to understand. It's that look she gets. That patient, slightly pitying look, like she's explaining calculus to a golden retriever. Will I always be the poor one to them? The one who needs everything explained, who came from nothing? Will I ever just be Lily? Or will I always be the lesser partner? Her fear was not of poverty, but of erasure. It was about identity, about being permanently relegated to a supporting role in the Thornton family drama, her own history and worth systematically invalidated. Arthur's heart clenched. The urge to speak was a physical pressure in his throat, to tell her about the hidden fortress of wealth that was her true birthright, to wipe that fear from her eyes with a single, staggering truth. He saw the numbers in his mind. $33 million, a sum that could silence every condescending remark forever. But he thought of Richard's joke about panhandling, of Cynthia's performative pity over his card, of their plans to manage her. To reveal it now would be to play his hand too early, to risk making the money the focus, the very thing Elena had despised. It would rob Lily of the chance to see their true characters for herself. Instead, he opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, burying her face in his shoulder, the delicate lace of her gown scratchy against his chin. He held her fiercely, a silent promise of his own. His silence was not a failure. It was a shield. He was letting them hang themselves with their own rope, gathering the evidence she would one day need to see. He held his daughter, the true, priceless treasure they were too blind to recognize, and said nothing, letting his fierce, protective hug speak the words he could not yet say. The photographer, a brisk woman with a professional smile and a camera that seemed an extension of her arm, began to corral the family for the final formal portraits. "All right, Thornton family, if we can gather just here by the mantelpiece." "Yes, perfect." It was like watching a well-rehearsed ballet of possession. Richard and Cynthia moved first, positioning themselves at the very center of the frame, their postures radiating ownership. Mark was drawn to his mother's side, his expression still slightly dazed from the day. David, smirking, slotted himself on his father's other flank, completing the core Thornton unit. They filled the space, their expensive clothes and assured smiles dominating the composition. Lily, looking small and uncertain in her brilliant white dress, was gently pulled by Cynthia to stand just slightly in front of Mark, a prized acquisition on display. Then the photographer's eyes scanned the periphery and found Arthur. "Mr. Thornton, father of the bride, is it?" she said, not unkindly, but with the efficiency of someone arranging props. "If you could just step right here, to the end." She gestured to the far left of the group, a space that had been physically created by the Thorntons' collective shift toward the center. It was a sliver of space, right at the edge of the frame, half in shadow. Arthur did not protest. He did not try to claim a more central position beside his daughter. He simply nodded and took the assigned spot. As he moved into place, Richard and Cynthia subtly adjusted their stances, shoulders turning inward toward their son, their bodies forming a near-physical barrier that separated Arthur from the core family. He was not just at the edge, he was physically crowded out, a parenthesis to their main sentence. He stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, his expression neutral. The photographer raised her camera. Beautiful. Wonderful. One big, happy family, she chirped, the flash popping, freezing the image in time. The Thorntons, solid, central and triumphant, and Arthur, on the periphery, a silent, watchful ghost at the edge of their narrative. He didn't need to fight for a place in their picture. He was letting them compose the perfect image of their own exclusion, a metaphor for their takeover that was more telling than any argument he could make. He was giving them all the rope they needed. The final guests had departed, leaving behind the ghost of their celebration, the scent of stale champagne, wilting flowers, and the quiet hum of exhaustion. The cavernous reception hall, once a stage for Thornton opulence, now felt hollow and exposed under the work lights the staff had switched on. Arthur moved through the space not like a guest, but like a man accustomed to seeing a task through to its end. He gathered abandoned champagne flutes from tables, his movements economical and sure. Stacking them neatly on a rolling cart a server was pushing toward the kitchen. He righted a toppled chair, smoothed a rumpled tablecloth. His assistance was offered without fanfare or subservience. It was the simple, dignified act of a man who respected labor and disliked waste. He saw the tiredness in the young staff's eyes and felt a kinship with them. They were all just cleaning up after someone else's performance. From a plush velvet banquette where they had finally settled, Richard and Cynthia Thornton watched him. They had shed their performative energy, their condescension now lazy, almost habitual, born of a lifetime of assuming their own superiority. Still at it, I see. Richard murmured around the rim of a freshly poured brandy snifter, his voice carrying in the quiet room. Quite the work ethic. You have to admire the persistence. Cynthia let out a soft, weary sigh, as if the very sight of manual labor was fatiguing. It's that generation, darling. They don't know how to relax, to let others handle things. It's rather sweet in a way. Like a faithful old retriever bringing you your slippers, she took a delicate sip of water. One does hope he'll allow us to take care of him eventually. All this effort can't be good for a man his age. Their comments were not meant to be overheard, which made their casual dismissal all the more revealing. They saw his competence not as a virtue, but as a quaint character flaw, a symptom of a life lived without the privilege of paid help. Arthur, stacking another glass onto the cart, heard the lazy contempt in their tones. He did not pause in his work. He did not acknowledge them. He simply stored the observation away, another piece of evidence in the quiet, damning case he was building against their character. Their condescension was the air they breathed, and he was content, for now, to let them suffocate in it. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen grew louder as the cleanup intensified. Arthur was methodically folding a discarded linen napkin when Richard's voice cut through the ambient noise, louder and more performative than before. He was speaking to a lingering business associate near the bar, but his words were clearly pitched to Carrie, a final power move before the night was done. Yes, a great success, Richard was saying, swirling the brandy in his glass. A new branch on the family tree. Of course, it comes with certain responsibilities. Mark's got a good head on his shoulders. He'll manage his new life well. And we'll support the other side, naturally. See that Arthur's comfortable in his old age. Can't have him wanting, can we? It's the least we can do. The words support, comfortable, old age were delivered with a magnanimous flourish, a public declaration of Thornton charity meant to cement Arthur's role as a permanent dependent. The associate murmured something approving, and Richard chuckled, the sound rich with self-satisfaction. Arthur's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second, the neatly folded napkin held between his fingers. He did not turn. He did not stiffen with indignation. Instead, a small, private smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly it was little more than a fleeting shadow. It was not a smile of amusement, but of cold, certain knowledge. They were so sure, so utterly confident in their assessment of him, in their own benevolent superiority. They were writing the story of his future with their own condescending words, building the cage they were so eager to put him in. And he was letting them. Every assumption, every planned allowance, every patronizing promise was another brick in a wall of their own construction. He placed the folded napkin on the growing pile with a quiet, precise motion. His resolve, already tempered to steel throughout the long day, now felt diamond-hard and unbreakable. He knew what was coming. He knew the precise moment when the narrative they had so carefully crafted would shatter against the simple, staggering truth he carried. The smile was gone, but the certainty remained, a cold, clear light in the quiet of the emptying hall. He returned to his work, a man with a secret, patiently waiting for the world to turn. The car door thudded shut, sealing Arthur in a sudden, profound silence. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, a sound so mundane it seemed to mock the surreal grandeur of a day he was leaving behind. He pulled away from the country club, its illuminated facade shrinking in the rearview mirror like a receding dream. The road ahead was dark, ribboned by the twin beams of his headlights. The gentle hum of the tires on asphalt was the only sound, a stark contrast to the hours of clinking crystal, orchestrated music, and carefully modulated voices. In this quiet, the noise of the reception echoed louder. Richard's booming condescension, Cynthia's sweetly venomous asides, the casual cruelty of their assumptions. They played back in his mind not as wounds, but as evidence, each moment a data point confirming the necessity of his silence. He rolled down the window a crack. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. And for a fleeting second he caught it, a ghost of jasmine and vanilla, so faint it might have been memory alone. Elena's presence filled the car, not as a sorrow, but as a resolve. He could almost feel her hand on his shoulder, her quiet approval a tangible force. He saw Lily's worried face during their dance, her fear of being erased. He saw the Thorntons' smug certainty as they planned his subsidized future. The two images crystallized his purpose. The money in the bank was not a prize to be won or a weapon to be brandished. It was a tool, Elena's tool, a means to ensure their daughter's independence, to protect her from a life of managed expectations and condescending charity. His decision, made in the numb shock of the lawyer's call, was now ironclad. He would not reveal assent until their characters were laid utterly bare. He would let them write their own indictment with their words and actions. The inheritance was not a trophy for him to claim. It was a sacred trust from Elena, to be deployed with precision and love, only when the time was right. The calm that settled over him was deeper than exhaustion. It was certainty. He drove on through the night, guided by the memory of a woman's wisdom and the quiet, fierce love for his daughter. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The silence of the house felt different today, no longer heavy with grief, but charged with a quiet anticipation. Arthur sipped his coffee, the warmth of familiar comfort. The events of the wedding replayed in his mind, not as a hurtful montage, but as a series of clarifying moments, each one a thread in the rope the Thorntons were braiding for themselves. The phone's ring was jarring in the stillness. He knew who it would be before he even picked up the receiver. The call display confirmed it. Richard Thornton. He let it ring twice more, finishing his sip of coffee before answering. Arthur speaking. Arthur. Good morning, good morning. Richard's voice was a masterclass in patronizing faux concern. Too hearty, too familiar. Hope you're recovering from all the excitement. Quite the day, wasn't it? It was a beautiful wedding, Arthur replied, his tone neutral. It was. Cynthia and I were just saying everything went off without a hitch. Richard paused, and Arthur could almost see him settling into his chair, preparing to get down to business. Which actually brings me to my reason for calling. Now that the celebration is behind us, it's time to look forward. We need to get things in order for the young ones. Solid foundation and all that. Arthur remained silent, letting Richard fill the space. We're having a little family meeting this afternoon, Richard continued, his tone implying the decision was already made and Arthur's attendance a mere formality. Just us, to discuss Lily and Mark's future. Finances, housing, that sort of practical matter. We want to make sure everyone is on the same page. Thought it would be good to have you there. For a clock at our place. Arthur looked out the window at the quiet street, the same view Elena had loved. He thought of the locket resting against his chest, of the promise he had made to her and to himself. He thought of the Thorntons' plans, so confidently laid out over champagne and cake. A small, cold smile touched his lips. "Of course, Richard," Arthur said, his voice calm, almost eager. "I'll be there. I'm very curious to see what you have in mind." He hung up the phone, the quiet of the house now humming with purpose. The stage was set. The players were taking their positions, and he was more than ready for the next act. The Thornton living room was a study in understated wealth, all neutral tones, sleek furniture, and art that looked expensive without being memorable. Arthur sat in a low-slung armchair that seemed designed to make its occupant feel small, his posture relaxed, his hands resting quietly on his knees. Across from him, Richard and Cynthia Thornton occupied a large sectional sofa, a united front of condescending concern. A leather-bound folio lay open on the glass coffee table between them. "We've taken the liberty of drafting a preliminary budget," Richard began, his tone that of a CEO presenting a quarterly report to a junior employee. He tapped a manicured finger on a spreadsheet filled with neat columns. "We're thinking a modest monthly allowance for each of them. Enough for essentials, of course, but we need to instill fiscal discipline from the start." Cynthia leaned forward, her smile a thin, sympathetic curve. "It's for their own good, Arthur. We've noticed Lily's spending habits can be a bit unstructured. A few too many online deliveries, little treats here and there. It's charmingly impulsive, but not sustainable. This will provide a necessary framework." Her words were velvet-wrapped criticisms, each one a subtle diminishment of his daughter's judgment. Richard nodded in agreement. "Precisely. We'll monitor the accounts, naturally, guide them away from frivolities. It's about building a solid future, not funding whims." He flipped a page in the folio. "Which brings us to housing. The condo we bought for Mark is perfect for a young couple. Top-notch security, excellent amenities." He paused, letting the unspoken comparison hang in the air, the implicit contrast between Mark's ready-made luxury and Arthur's own modest means. "And for you, Arthur," Cynthia interjected, her voice dripping with faux generosity. "We know that big, old house must feel terribly empty now. And the upkeep, well, it must be a burden. We own a small apartment building not far from here. There's a cozy unit coming available on the ground floor. We could let you have it at a significant discount. Consider it family helping family." The offer was delivered with a smile, but its insult was profound. The apartment they described would be small, dark, a place of charity meant to reinforce his position as a dependent, a problem they were magnanimously solving. They were not just planning his daughter's life. They were planning his, with an allowance of pity and a discounted cell in which to live out his days. Arthur listened, his expression one of polite attention, giving no sign that the walls they were so confidently building were about to crumble around them. Arthur listened, his gaze steady, his breathing even. He watched them lay out their condescending blueprint for his and Lily's future with the unshakable confidence of those who believed they held all the cards. Richard's voice was a measured drone, detailing line items and oversight protocols as if managing a corporate subsidiary, not a marriage. Cynthia punctuated his points with soft, pitying smiles and little sighs that framed their control as benevolent concern. They spoke of monitoring accounts, of guiding Lily's unstructured habits, of the charitable offer of a cramped apartment, each word another brick in the wall of their own making. Arthur absorbed it all, his silence not passive, but profoundly strategic. He was letting them talk themselves into a corner, their entitlement and greed unfolding with such unself-conscious clarity it was almost breathtaking. They saw his life, his daughter's life, as a project to be managed, a ledger to be balanced in their favor. Finally, Richard closed the folio with a definitive snap. "So, that's the plan. We'll get the paperwork started for the apartment next week. It's a relief to have it all settled, isn't it?" The room fell silent, awaiting his grateful acquiescence. Arthur leaned forward slightly, placing his own hands flat on the cool glass of the coffee table. His movement was calm, deliberate. He looked first at Cynthia, then at Richard, his expression not one of anger or supplication, but of cool, clear revelation. Elena, he began, his voice quiet yet filling the room, believed in planning for the future. She was always the practical 1 inch. He allowed a small, sad smile to touch his lips. She had her own assets, you see, investments she made long before we met. She never felt the need to speak of them. She believed true security was something quiet, something private. He paused, watching their expressions begin to shift from patronizing patience to faint confusion. The first crack in their certainty. She left it all to me. Arthur continued, his tone matter of fact, as if discussing the weather. A trust. $33 million. The number hung in the air, stark and impossible in the sleek, neutral room. Richard's jaw went slack. Cynthia's carefully composed face seemed to freeze, then fracture, her eyes widening in pure, uncomprehending shock. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 spots of high, blotchy red. The pity in her gaze evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization. They had been performing their magnanimity for a king they believed to be a pauper. The silence that followed was no longer expectant. It was stunned, deafening, utterly void of the condescending certainty that had filled it just moments before. Arthur sat back, his work done, watching the world they had built for themselves dissolve into dust. Arthur let the silence stretch, watching the shock solidify on their faces. Richard's bluster deflating into stunned confusion. Cynthia's polished composure cracking into pale, wide-eyed disbelief. The number 33 million seemed to echo in the tastefully silent room, dismantling every assumption they had so confidently built. My silence these past days, Arthur continued, his voice still calm, devoid of gloating or anger, was not secrecy for its own sake. It was a test, Elena's final lesson, in a way. She wanted to ensure that any future built for our daughter would be founded on character, not currency. That would be about love, not leverage. He looked from one stunned face to the other, his gaze steady. You have been very helpful in revealing yours. Richard found his voice first, a strangled, disbelieving sound. 33, but how? A mechanic's wife? That's impossible. Elena was many things, Arthur said softly. A mechanic's wife was only one of them, and the one she was most proud of. Her mind was her own. Her investments were her own. And her wisdom. He let the sentence hang, his meaning clear. Cynthia finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. You let us believe? You sat there, and you listened. I did, Arthur acknowledged. I listened to you plan my daughter's life, as if she were a poorly managed subsidiary. I listened to you offer me charity like a bone to a dog. I listened to you joke about my retirement plan. And I understood completely the world you wanted for her. A world of allowances and oversight. A world where her worth is something you grant her, not something she owns. He leaned forward again, his expression shifting from observation to declaration. That is not the world Elena wanted for her, and it is not the world she will have. He stood up, not with theatrical force, but with a quiet finality that commanded the room. The money is real. It is already in a trust, but it is not a thorn in trust. There will be no allowances with strings, no monitored accounts, no guidance on her spending habits. There will be no apartment for me, at a discount or otherwise. He looked at them, these 2 people who had believed themselves the architects of his future. The trust will provide Lily and Mark with complete independence, a home of their own choosing, the freedom to build a life on their own terms, without your oversight or approval. It will be managed by impartial trustees, according to Elena's wishes. Your control over them, and your condescension toward me, ends now. He paused, letting the full weight of his words settle. This was never about winning a game against you. It was about honoring a promise to her. It was about protecting our daughter from a lifetime of being managed. This is Elena's final gift to them. Her wisdom, her love, their freedom. Arthur did not wait for a response. He had said all that needed to be said. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving them in the ruins of their own condescension. the air in their perfect living room thick with the ashes of their shattered narrative.